Welcome to Mid-American Money. I'm Ernie Goss, Professor of Economics at Creighton University and Director of the Economic Forecasting Group. And as you can perhaps tell, we're away from our regular setting. We're at the downtown Hilton Hotel in Omaha, Nebraska, across the street from the Berkshire Hathaway stockholders in their annual trek to Omaha have come here, and we're going to be talking to some of those individuals. We're going to be talking about the economy. And but first off, let me welcome Tony Hendrickson, Dean of the College of Business at Creighton, who's a normal co-host with me. Thanks for joining us today,
Thanks,
Tony. And we're going to talk to some of the taxpayers, business owners later on. But first off, let me talk about what we're seeing in our monthly survey of 1,000 businesses. This is 1,000 businesses stretching from North Dakota and Minnesota in the north to Arkansas and Oklahoma in the south. And what that survey is telling us, the survey results came out this morning, May the 1st, one day before these Berkshire Hathaway folks, the Woodstock for capitalists, as we're going to talk about that economy. First off, the negatives are getting less negative. Now that's better than the negatives getting more negative. Business Conditions Index, which is a leading economic indicator from these supply managers, rises to its highest level since this economic tailspin began. The region lost jobs for the 15th time in the last 16 months. Importantly, supply managers reduced inventories to their lowest level since since we began the survey in 1994. Of course, that means we're going to replenish these stocks later on. That's good for the economy. And finally, deflation in the pipeline. We're still seeing deflation. Now, Tony, here we are. The Berkshire Hathaway folks, what makes these stockholders so giddy? They're running around town. Our neighbor, Warren Buffett, they're trying to buy the stakes he's buying. Walk like Warren, talk like Warren. What's the deal?
They want to invest like Warren.
That's true. That's the main thing.
That's the main thing that they're here for. I think that they're a little more optimistic, mostly because most of them are investors. They obviously have invested in Berkshire Hathaway. While it's taken a little bit of a dip, as the entire market has. I think they're a little buoyed because over the last 5-6 weeks, the market hasn't been as bad as it was, say, 60 or 90 days ago. So it's come back a little bit. It was testing about 7,000 as a bottom. It's now been fairly consistently at 8 or slightly above 78 to 8,200. And I think that for the most part, they feel a little bit of glimmer of hope that it's heading in a better direction.
Well, speaking of, let me dash that glimmer of hope. Yesterday, Chrysler, of course, went into bankruptcy. And Tony, let me shake your hand. You, in our last broadcast, predicted the headline was going to be a bankruptcy of an American automobile producer. So you got it.
Well,
so,
I might have been thinking of General Motors, and the jury's still out on that.
Yeah, well, you just may be early on that one, Tony. So is now the time to buy Ford and GM, the two American automobile producers left? No?
I'm not buying.
You're not buying? Yeah, but you're a conservative, cautious business person.
Well, I am. So I still think that the auto industry in general needs some restructuring. Certainly, American auto industry is going to go through a lot more painful time.
And what about the government being now in the driver's seat? Imagine that. In other words, if Chrysler had a difficult time, does Secretary Treasurer Geithner, can he produce automobiles as well as those individuals have done? I say no.
Well, I think that's troubling to see that the federal government has taken an ownership role in a company at all, but especially in this company. I mean, historically, what happened earlier, a couple decades ago, when Lee Iacocca went to the government and said,
that was a number of decades ago.
Loan me some money, and I will turn this around. And he did, and to his credit, to Chrysler's credit, and actually to the credit of the federal government and our administration at the time. By making him that loan, he did that. He saved Chrysler, turned things around. They had a great run since then. I think the difference here that I see is it's different loaning them money and then them paying it back as they did ahead of time and taking an ownership stake. I mean, my question is, who votes those shares at the stockholders meeting?
Well, I think perhaps Mr. Geithner, I see.
Well, you know, it's our government. I mean, is it, what gives him, why is he going to do that?
All right.
I'm part of the government from the standpoint I pay my taxes. Can I go vote those shares?
Speaking of the government, this week, President Obama's budget proposal was passed by Congress. Talking about an intrusive government or an expansion of government, we're talking about $3.5 trillion with a deficit of 1.6, 1.7 trillion. I think that's going to spark some hellacious, potentially hellacious inflation later on, higher interest rates, and or higher taxes. How do you see it, Tony?
You know, unless all of economic theory and knowledge is worthless, it's got to spark a tremendous amount of inflation in the future. There's no way around it. You can't put that kind of funds into the economy and have it be absorbed at its present rate. It's not possible.
Okay, and so what we're here and hopefully attempting to provide investors, taxpayers, citizens with some advice. What advice are you giving them?
Well, I think we're still taking the air out of the ball. I think we're still seeing some deflation. I think that the economy is still slowing down. I don't think it's quite hit bottom. I think it's slowing down in this rate of contraction. But I'm not sure we're ready to see it actually pump back up.
But inflation might pump up, and as I've said in past broadcasts, what I'm long on are TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, betting on inflation coming back. I think this is the time to be buying those. Also, I think long term, I'm international, not domestic. I think I would be buying a growth fund such as Vanguard International Value. Now, we're of course not endorsing that. I do own that mutual fund, and I'm not suggesting anybody buy it there. I've taken some hits lately. But what else can we do?
Well, I think there's opportunities in infrastructure. I've said that all along. The government clearly wants to build up our infrastructure. So construction, you know, a firm here locally, Kiewit, does a lot in terms of highways and large construction projects. I think that's a good investment at this point in time. I also think that energy, I think there's a lot of focus on alternative energy, our energy infrastructure.
So buying some, if you can get in on some of those companies early on.
Right.
But on those, if I'm in, I'm out early. I don't want to be stuck like some of the folks have been stuck with ethanol.
Right.
I mean, they held on, and as we know, they've taken some losses. Some of the banks have taken some heavy hits.
There's going to be some risk there. I mean, because this is new innovation, new technology. If you bet right, you could see some very good profits in the future. If you bet wrong, you could be putting your wealth at risk.
What about banks? Banks and the two at the centerpiece of all this, the downturn, that's the banks and that's housing. You buying either one of those? Housing stocks, bank stocks?
I think housing still is going to continue to contract.
So if you buy, don't get in right now. Perhaps delay. That would be my advice. I think mortgage rates are headed upward. I'm sorry, but you're going to see higher mortgage rates likely later on.
I think you're going to. I'm not sure that they've completely hit bottom. They're still at this point. They went down earlier this week. I think there's not a lot of room for them to continue to go down, but I think there's still tremendous softness because there's softness in the underlying asset, which is housing.
Right, and watch the banking sector. Boy, there's some losses to be had there. I mean, I don't think the worst has been announced yet. We're going to see some tough times, and of course that's going to spill over into some of the stockholders, and that's of course not good. The Bank of America, of course, this week the stock said no to their president their CEO keeping the chairmanship, got him out of there. Is that a good move, by the way?
I think it's more politics on the board, and they just weren't happy with some of the decision making and some of the issues that have gone on relative to regulators and the sound bites, and they kind of put them in a bad light. The board didn't like that kind of attention being drawn to it.
I think we definitely need to see less government, more business. Well, thanks, Tony. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be coming back later on. Well, thanks to you. Thanks for joining us for this first segment of Mid-American Money. Thank you very much. Ernie Goss, Tony Hendrickson, coming from the beautiful Quest Center in the Hilton Hotel.